Welcome to this episode of the World According to Irina Tsukerman, our very special series on global politics on the KJ Masterclass Live. Irina Tsukerman is a US based national security and human rights lawyer as well as a renowned geopolitical analyst. Her writings and commentary have appeared in diverse US and international media and have been translated to over a dozen languages. Every fortnight in the World According to Irina Tsukerman, we traverse the geopolitical landscape and delve into pressing international issues and gain insight from Irina's expert perspective. Welcome to the show once again, Irina.
Thank you so much. Glad to be here as always.
Welcome. Several big topics again today. And Irina, so let's first talk about the fires. Los Angeles wildfires. What's happening with that? How do we understand? We all know about the fires, but we don't know about what's been talked about it, what are the causes, how does it look like from here that you can see from.
Well, apparently there's been more than one cause to the wildfires. There's been a mixture of carelessness, incidental damage resulting from incidental fires. There's been several arson incidents, and there's been the long-term issue of the fact that it's just a very dry climate, prone to wildfires, prone to winds at this time of the year. This is not the first time this incident happened. In 2020, there was also a very destructive wildfire incident that destroyed many houses. This time it's a lot worse, and it's been exacerbated also by human errors. The fact that there was a budget cut for firefighters to the tune of 17 million shortly before this started. One of the water reservoirs was under repairs and was empty before, so there was shortage of water supply. A lot of the firefighters had been fired for failing to take the vaccine during COVID, and those jobs were never restored. The fires were breaking out in several places simultaneously, so the firefighters were stretched thin across the states. Um, and it was just difficult to get to one place from one place to another. So the spread was very high, and it was just difficult to contain. There was also just a shortage of water in general due to poor planning. Um, there was other disasters that exacerbated the situation. The fact that the State Farm insurance company here pulled house insurance for many homes right before it happened. So the result was over 180,000 people of all backgrounds, not just celebrities, displaced, and many of them will not be able to get insurance payouts on their houses.
Right, Irina. So insurance companies were more prepared and ready to take care of their own interests, but the administration was not. Do we understand it this way? How did what happened to the residents? Didn't they also wake up to this all things?
Well, given that there's a history of these incidents, you would think that there would be more pressure on the government to plan better. Some of the things were inadvertent. There was also a confluence of different factors that altogether came to, create a very bleak picture. But there was also a lot of questions about just poor planning. Now, there was a controversy about fish that you may have heard of. There were local tribes that were demanding that some of the water reservoirs and dams were lifted so that the rare local fish could flourish. To be honest with you, I don't believe that was the only or even a major problem. I actually think this is kind of a red herring, so to speak. I think the real reason is just failure to plan adequately and to stock up on enough water and to have easy access to that water and to fix the broken hydrants and to address infrastructural issues. That I think was a far bigger issue here.
Right. So where do we go from here now? What happens to those people who have been impacted, those people who have been displaced? What about the future? What is happening What can we expect?
Well, the President Biden said that the federal government will cover 180 days worth of damage with federal funding. That's billions worth of dollars, and there'll be further applications beyond what his administration can approve in this period of time. There's been questions in the newly confirmed Republican Congress about that because many have issues. They don't want to write out checks to the state and local governments which have failed to basically put prior funding to good use, because remember 4 years ago we had the same situation. Federal government came to the end to their aid, and 4 years later we are facing errors and mistakes and incompetence and city authorities who were not reacting quickly enough, and so forth. So some of the members of Congress are pushing for conditions, strings attached to this funding before it will be committed. And there's of course controversy. Some people are saying, how come you can demand conditions in an emergency? Others are saying, well, what the Congress needs to approve is not really emergency funding, and they'll approve some level of it, but they'll attach strings to the rest. Or they're saying, well, if it's such an emergency, then the state and the locals should have no problems agreeing to those conditions. So I don't know how it will be ultimately resolved, but there has been a push for some greater accountability regarding the local authorities' role in this disaster.
Absolutely, absolutely. Let's hope for the best. Let's hope that the residents get some sort of a solace in these difficult times. Now, from wildfires to a chance of a ceasefire, Israel Hamas talks. What happens there? Should we expect, are we expecting any breakthrough? Does it look very likely? What about hostage exchange?
Well, they have announced the ceasefire today, and the ceasefire is a long-term, 6-week long ceasefire with multiple phases. The ultimate idea is to have all the hostages released into Israeli custody, but there's been some last-minute, of course, demands by Hamas. There's been last minute renegotiations. So the framework for this ceasefire is the same framework that was proposed in May by the Biden administration, but there's been some changes. Hamas has agreed to some conditions, such as allowing Israel not to withdraw completely and immediately, and Israel also committed to demands made by Hamas, which included releasing over 1,000 convicted terrorists in total, either to Gaza or to a place of their choosing, not pursuing the Hamas leadership, which means basically Hamas remains politically in power. It also means that Israel will not strive to assassinate or arrest anyone there. So all of these things are very concerning, and in the first phase, Israel is expected to get 33 or 33 people back, of them 2 Americans. But according to a Fox News report, only 23 of these 33 are alive. I don't know how accurate that is. The exchange that initial release is supposed to take place on Sunday, unless there are some last minute changes before that. And as I said, after the announcement was already made by Qatar and the United States, Hamas made some additional last-minute demands, which Israel rejected. Other demands that were made earlier included issues concerning the Philadelphia corridor and the Rafah crossing, but I am not sure exactly how that was resolved. So essentially, during the 6 weeks that follow, both sides are supposed to refrain from military action, while the remaining phases of hostage and prisoner releases and exchanges are ongoing.
Absolutely. So this is what is happening for the world in terms of future strategy for both Hamas and Israel. What are they aiming for? Israel perhaps for hostage, but beyond there must be a bigger plan. As for Hamas, what are they going to get out of this? Is it only about prisoner exchange, or beyond that, they are looking for a much more different strategy longer term?
Well, Hamas got a huge win in the sense of being allowed to remain in power. Basically, Israel is expected to withdraw after the exchanges are complete, while Hamas essentially remains in power, although the original objective of the war was actually to put an end to Hamas rule in Gaza. So it's not clear whether that will change after these 6 weeks are over, but it looks like the pressure is on Israel to withdraw completely after all of that is said and done. It's also not clear what happens with the strategic border issues. Who exactly is going to be in charge of the security and for how long? There are questions remaining about humanitarian aid. The ceasefire provides for much more humanitarian aid input, but of course, Hamas has been stealing that humanitarian aid and confiscating it, and there's been armed gangs that are terrorizing the Palestinians in Gaza, and IDF cannot possibly be expected to guarantee security for all of these people on its own. It's been extremely dangerous. So a lot of questions remain unresolved, and they are supposed to be discussed in the process of these exchanges. And the bottom line is that Netanyahu and Biden and Trump, especially, all wanted some sort of a diplomatic victory at the end of their respective terms or beginning of their terms, and this is what they're getting out of it. What happens after, of course, remains to be seen, but for now they get to have the limelight and the big headlines.
Right. So is it a diplomatic victory? Because Israel seemed to be in a very strong position. Here, Hamas seems to come out powerful. Biden, I don't know how much credit he can claim in these dying days of his administration. He seems to be more active right now, as I said, in the dying days of his administration. How do we look at it? Means this gives an impression that, Hamas is there to stay. So was this the message that Israel wanted to give? And would they want to, is it a right strategy for them to give this sort of a, this sort of an impression to the world?
It's a disastrous decision. Anti-Israel groups and pro-Hamas groups around the world are celebrating it, and they're celebrating it as a victory. Now, it is true that Hamas has been severely weakened, but they have been regrouping in parts of Gaza that Israel has cleared. Now, allegedly, Hamas has a new Sinvar, some strategic genius that they're hoping to unleash at some point. And if Israel withdraws, there's nothing stopping Hamas from rebuilding, getting assistance from Syria, from Turkey via Syria, or maybe from Iran via West Bank, where Iran-backed terrorists are quite entrenched at the moment, and becoming strong again and planning better for the future, and doing more of the same, and probably sooner rather than later. So it's a big win for them. Now, some are speculating that Israel got something out of it. For instance, a green light to attack Iran directly. But that was discussed separately and apart from these Hamas negotiations. And it was not, a separate condition. It was considered something that needed to be dealt with. From Trump's perspective, perhaps Hamas was a distraction, and the bad publicity was a distraction. But the bottom line is these are still a very dangerous people, and nothing has really been fully resolved about this issue. So the only winners here are really are Qatar and Hamas. Even Trump is not going to enjoy his victory for long if Hamas decides to move aggressively, and if they return to violating the ceasefire sooner rather than later, it will make Trump look bad rather than victorious.
Right, right. So from there, let's move on to another, from one ceasefire talk or success to another ceasefire possibility. Trump is set to meet Putin. Means what can we expect from this, from this particular meeting? Biden seems, as I said, very active in this last days of his administration, and Trump is yet to be inaugurated, a few days to go, but he seems to be already very, very active. How does is this meeting happening? Is this not? Is it all speculation?
I think so far it's more speculation than scheduling, but it is possible that it will take place. And if it does, it gives a huge victory to Putin, especially if Putin rejects what Trump offers to him, which is, more likely than not. Putin gets to say, I dragged, the US president to meet with me even after doing all these horrible things and after being significantly weakened, and I get to dictate my terms. Now, the situation in Ukraine has been complicated. The Russians took two metal mines and one major coal mine, which gives them significant access to resources and gives them strategic advantage. The offensive in Kursk in Russia has stalled, and Russia has been advancing in Ukraine, although it has suffered heavy losses along with the North Koreans, whose faces are now being burned off to prevent them from being identified, and they're being given fake passports to disguise their origin. Nevertheless, Ukraine is kind of in a difficult military situation, and it's not clear what will happen if U.S. does not proceed with giving additional aid soon. At the same time, Russia seems to have lost all of its air defenses, and Ukraine is pretty much attacking major oil refineries and major military factories and other strategic objects inside, very deep inside Russia. So it's also suffering heavy economic losses that are not easy to replace at the same time. It's a mess. It's a messy situation, but for Putin, the strategy will probably be to kind of um, put the onus of responsibility on Ukraine, claim that Russia has the resources to continue the war, and essentially show Russia to be politically strong. Because right now, the whole world is watching what's going to happen, because it's very difficult for countries outside to assess the relative strength of what's going on and whether Russia has any chance of really winning. And I think US will be well positioned to demonstrate which way it will all ultimately go, and I think that's what everyone's waiting for. And Putin cannot afford to come out looking like he's in any way capitulating to Trump, but he can very well make Trump seem to be capitulating to him, depending on what happens. So this is what Trump needs to be forewarned about, and to understand that the meeting is not a victory. It in itself is already handing Putin a huge deck of cards that he doesn't really shouldn't have.
Right, right. So, what does Zelensky have in this whole situation? They have a few North Korean soldiers with them, caught, as they said in the
Yes.
announcement, and the Kursk region. Beyond that, they have lost a lot of land. How do you think the Ukraine Zelensky must be looking at this whole prospect of this meeting?
Well, the fact is, one of the Trump's advisors, Sebastian Gorka, who was nominated for the position of the senior director for counterterrorism, said that if Russia does not agree to negotiations, Trump is going to flood Ukraine with weapons. So strategically, Ukraine is actually well positioned because Russia can be its own worst enemy. They've they've cornered themselves into a position where they cannot afford to compromise in any way. The level of propaganda has been extremely high, and what's interesting, the Russian propagandists now have been telling their supporters to have more realistic expectations, that they will not be able to take all of Ukraine, that they will have to settle for the areas they already control. And this is a ratcheting down of comments from even a few weeks ago, where they were still pushing for full unequivocal victory. So it could be that even Putin is starting to understand that U.S. can position itself to crush Russia's military effort with relative ease if it so chooses. We'll see what happens, but Zelensky will try to play this to his best interest. And what's also helpful to him is that Russia is not stopping its malign activities anywhere else. So I think it's becoming clear even to Trump that the war cannot be easily resolved in 24 hours. First of all, and second, that Russia has no intentions of stopping, and its activities are a lot more than about Ukraine. It's also about entrenching itself closely to be positioned to meddle into European affairs and cause problems. And economic problems in Europe means, more expensive products, more expensive trade. It's bad for U.S. economy at the end of the day.
Right, right. You are a expert geopolitical analyst. You understand these situations. You have been watching this situation since the day it started. What do you think? Trump is rushing a bit, into this because he's talked about this 24-hour thing earlier on. Do you think whatever the outcome of this meeting, whatever the outcome in terms of the Russia Ukraine war is, that will have limited impact and that is not going to be long term? How does it look to you? What's your gut feeling at this point in time about how things are moving?
I think Trump should not rush because everybody wants him to rush, and that's exactly why he should take his time. He should take his time with this meeting and not schedule it for too early. I know it's very tempting to try to resolve the conflict quickly because of that publicity, but time is actually uh, something that the US can afford for its own sake, and it should be thinking of how to build up its allies, not to empower its enemies. Russia has been openly adversarial to the US. Whatever reservations you may have about Ukraine, there's no question that they were solidly allied with the West. So I think it's very easy to define who's a friend and who's an enemy. We have many imperfect allies, but we have a few very clear adversaries, and I think that makes the calculus here very very easy in my opinion.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, moving on from wildfires to ceasefire talks to a lot of water, people taking holiday in India's largest religious festival, the Mahakumbh, that kicks off in India. How do you see it from what do you understand of the Mahakumbh that's on in India at the moment? Very
Well,
holy, very, lots of people taking the holiday.
I think for first of all, I think this is interesting that it's something that is finally breaking into Western headlines, and I think there is a kind of an opening towards trying to understand the Indians' religious and cultural scene better. In my opinion, it's a huge cultural diplomacy breakthrough for India, and I think this goes beyond the kind of hippie people who like to go to ashrams and meditate and hike around the country. This is kind of a more serious, I think, public diplomacy breakthrough that kind of humanizes the country, takes it well beyond various political campaigns that focus on government issues and problems and things like that. And I think the fact that this is attracting attention is going to be very much a boon in building and strengthening relations going forward, no matter who is in power.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's a very holy place in that sense. It's a confluence of three rivers: Ganga, Yamuna, and Saraswati. The mythical river Saraswati, which they say has vanished, but it meets at that particular place. Many years back, I had the great fortune of taking a dip at that place, not during Mahakumbh, but on any other when I visited Prayagraj many years back. And I can tell you, it's a very, very different sort of a feeling. Whoever it is, once you understand the significance of the birth on this planet, whether you are a Indian or not, maybe because of the cultural base, but the feeling is totally very, very different. You feel something, especially with the thought that it is here the three rivers meet, and this is where you can attain moksha, as they say, nirvana, out of the cycle of birth and death. So many things to think, so many things happening. Talking of India, let's talk also about Jake
Mhm.
Sullivan's late hour economic push for cooperation in India. What does that mean? What is happening here?
Well, one of the issues that they discussed were, of course, Chinese dams, but they were also talking about strengthening investments and economic exchanges and building up continuity between the transition and the government, which is a positive thing. You don't want to be in a situation where one government changes and the other comes in and completely cancels all the previous policies, who does not follow through on the existing agreements and just lets them slide. It makes kind of relations very unstable. So I think actually it was very positive that despite the fact that the administration is in its last days, it's underscoring the importance of the relationship by bringing it into the fold to the last days and giving a good note for the new administration to come in and to resume these important discussions. And it's also very positive that they focused on constructive, practical steps and not, you know, points of dispute, ideology, disagreements, or some scandals. So I think, in my opinion, it's been a very positive development. No question, a lot of these people, upon retiring from office, will probably be seeking to capitalize on these deals from a private perspective. Not that I can blame them, but I'm sure that may have contributed to why they took the trips they did. I think people like Sylvan will be looking towards tech sector, board memberships, investments, and opportunities, lobbying, and kind of positions. And I think this visit was sort of laying the road for continuing these relationships for when they're out of office in a few days.
Absolutely. So outgoing Jake Sullivan and incoming Elon Musk. What is Elon Musk doing? Means he's got so active, so active that we are just trying to run with his speed and understand what is he trying to understand, do and achieve. AFD endorsement in Germany, grooming gangs controversy in UK, and also this talk about TikTok, also the US part, he being, perhaps he may buy it. How does it look like? Who is Elon Musk? It seems to be like the Trump's some sort of a shadow itself.
Oh well, there's another point that happened since these developments, which is turns out that the recent exchange, Italy exchanged. They received back an Italian journalist who was in Iran, and they released Abedini. He's an Iranian who has smuggled U.S. technology to Iran and also cooperated with the RGC to which led to the death of three Americans in Jordan. He was wanted for extradition by the US. Under mysterious circumstances, he was released in exchange. Meloni government claims that they visited the US, met with Trump in Mar-a-Lago, and he gave a green light, which frankly does not sound very Trump-like when it comes to Iran. So now the mystery is resolved. Apparently, Musk was the secret party involved in this story. In the totality of all these situations, endorsing far-right parties in Germany and the UK, starting scandals, all of these are less about ideology and politics necessarily, and more about advancing his own business interests with the particular people who are looking to these parties for partnership. In UK, he's actively trying to bring Reform Party to power. The Reform Party has been criticized for spouting Russian propaganda. Nigel Farage has moved away from that since the war in Ukraine began, but uh, Elon Musk actually has had a falling out with him, has been calling for a different leadership there. The grooming scandal is real. There has been a scandal where the Labour Party and other parties, by the way, cover up of the Pakistani rape gangs, organized gangs that had sprouted for a period of time, and they were massively enticing and raping young girls. And when the conservatives brought this issue toward for investigation, the Labours rejected it. But at this point, the way Musk presented this real and very horrifying situation brought by lax policies, pro-crime policies, one would say, cover-up of Islamist and radical activity and excessive political correctness and so forth. The way this was brought up was so politicized and so blatantly self-serving that I cannot imagine anyone could see any justice being served when it's presented in that particular manner. And of course, in Germany, AfD is tied to allegations of Russian money, definitive Russian propaganda, Nazi roots. The Christian Democratic candidate is very conservative. He's very pro restrictions on immigration. So the fact that Musk, when you have a center right guy who actually meets all these reasonable expectations from a conservative leader, is instead going for people with a very extremist reputation and foreign links. This is a pattern. And what's more interesting is that Musk is not really criticizing South African government, which is much worse than all of these current governments put together and has links to Russia, China, Iran, assorted terrorist groups, Islamists, and so forth. Musk is not interfering in that in any way, not calling for any sort of changes or investigations of corruption or nefarious activities. So, to me, this does not speak of principles. It doesn't speak of even U.S. interest in having better governance among other countries that it has trade relationship with. It speaks to me for entirely self-serving business interests that are not necessarily even fully conferred with Trump himself, because I don't see Trump getting involved in all of these situations. So, randomly speaking about Germany, it's all Musk's initiative, and I think at some point, and Trump will feel that this is too much. You cannot have two co-presidents in the U.S. You need to have one head of state with a clear policy.
Absolutely, absolutely. With lots of dust strewn around with Elon Musk, involvement in so many things too. Jimmy Carter's funeral being laid to rest. How do you see? Does it look like he will be remembered? His legacy, a good man, especially with the Biden administration, with so many things happening at the moment. Does it look like Jimmy Carter will be remembered, a good man, and those were good times? How do you see it all?
I mean, I actually think that in many ways the Biden administration was a kind of a political reincarnation of Jimmy Carter. I I think arguably Biden and his group were far more ideological in many ways, even more so than Carter. But they repeated the same pattern. Started out pushing for peace, opposing assorted nuclear movements, trying to resolve problems with the China, with everybody, with Iran, and so forth, but ended up being challenged and ended up actually giving great more room to defense than they ever counted upon, and ended up with a very muddled and contradictory security policy after all this, because they started out so weak to begin with and tried to please too many parties at the same time in a contradictory way. So we saw a lot of Jimmy Carter's worst mistakes being almost willfully repeated by the Biden administration. And I'm hoping we will not have a third return of that next time around, because I think twice of the same mistake was quite enough to and obvious that these sort of things don't work. Having a policy based entirely on ideals and not taking account of security concerns, the human nature, and the practical steps is all, no matter the good intentions, will always bound to backfire.
Absolutely, absolutely. With this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of The World According to Irina Tsukerman on the KJ Masterclass Live. Thank you so
Thank you
much
so
indeed
much.
for joining us.